So I'm here with my guest, Fabrizio Aiello,
Aiello?
nice Aiello, creator of Horace H. Hoover. Yeah, I perused this book recently. It's very good.
Thank you.
Highly recommend it. Uh, so how did you get your start into art, and what did you mostly draw for when you first started out?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, when I was very young, the first stuff that I can remember actually drawing would be like comic strips. So,
Oh,
I remember doing like Garfield or Beetle Bailey. That was an old comic strip. That was the first thing I remember drawing. And I quickly went into comics because I was collecting and reading before I could actually read. My brothers collected, so there were always comics laying around. Um, so I started drawing the comic books, but then I did shift to more illustration stuff, so fantasy, horror, like illustration. So I didn't do a ton of comics, but I did do some. And then obviously I went to art school. I went for a fine art degree in focus and drawing. When I was in school, I was doing charcoal and graphite and painting classes, so I wasn't doing much comics. I didn't really have time to do anything other than classes, so not much comics. And to be honest, that was actually the first time that I sort of had a gap in reading comics because I'm in college. I don't have access to comics. I don't really have the money to buy comics at that time
mhm.
either. So there was a that was the first gap in my comic book reading. After I graduated, I had an old friend of mine come up to me and ask, "Hey, do you want to do a comic book, like a short comic book with me?" I'm like, "That sounds great. I haven't drawn comics or really looked at them in a while." He wrote like I think it was maybe 10 or 12 page short story. So I'll take a crack at it. I looked at the comics at that time. So that was like the era of Witchblade, Dark
Mhm.
Child, and Evangeline, that kind of stuff. And I'll be honest, it was a very different style for me. I was used to the older books, so I tried to mimic the new stuff just because I guess this is how it's done now, kind of thing. I did an okay job, maybe not the best job in the world. Um, it was a decent crack at it, I would say.
Mhm.
We actually went to the Pittsburgh Comic Con and shared a table with somebody there, and we had Xeroxed and printed out, a few copies of this short story. So it was one of those deals where it was nice to have something quote unquote finished, go to a con, show it, but the reaction, it was very difficult just to
Mhm.
jump into it. After the gap in sort of comic books in general, drawing. So after that, I bailed again basically on comics and went back to, sort of traditional stuff, drawing, painting, things like that. I always dabbled for sure, but I didn't sit down and write a comic or draw a comic because I didn't have a writer. So it really was me just randomly doing a drawing. It gets thrown in a pile, and then there's really nothing to do with it at that point. And then I don't know how many years later, another person comes up to me, "Hey, do you want to do a comic book?" Sure, I'll do a comic book. He wrote it. I think this was like 10 pages or whatever. Drew, color, lettered, inked, all that jazz. And it was okay. It was okay. Having something finished again was a nice like like a milestone, but
Mhm.
it wasn't at the quality that I wanted. And it was very difficult for me because I'm good at these things. So I'm good at illustration and figure studies and all this kind of stuff. And then to do comics, and I can see where I'm at, and I'm not great
Mhm.
at it. It was difficult to kind of continue on with that.
Yeah.
So I kind of bailed on it again. Then I started doing a lot of game development because I'm a programmer, and I needed a lot of game art. So I'm like, well, maybe I will kind of do comic book art for the game. It was like an interesting melding of things. And then maybe if I do enough of that, I can take a crack at another comic book eventually. The game never came out. It was a pretty cool game. I kind of bailed on it. But it it definitely was a lot of practice again in sort of that comic book style. So then, when I finally got the idea for Horace H. Hoover, I felt I had enough skill to actually attempt it. So I
Okay.
worked on the writing. I did a sculpture first. People seem to like the sculpture and the character design. So I'm like, well, maybe it's worthwhile to actually, flesh out the script and do a short story. So I did a 10-page short story. I got some pretty good feedback on that. And that really kind of led into the second short story. And then I sent it out to publishers or a few publishers, and it was published. So fast forward, I have focused 100% on drawing and comics. You can see my progression from page one to page,
Yeah.
95. Um, but at least it's consistent in that it's still me. But I try new things every issue, and I try to sort of raise the bar in complexity.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at now, working on issue 4.
So throughout this time, was this your first writing experience, or did you do writing before that?
A little bit of writing. I never shared any of the writing with people, which a lot of people do. That's like, I know people, I wrote a short story, but I never let anybody read it. I did do a couple of short stories, and one was a graphic novel. But I felt at the time it was a little too generic, and
Okay.
it was fine. I thought it worked, but in my head, I don't know, it has to like capture my imagination
Mhm.
for it to be worthwhile. So I shelved that. I started another graphic novel. I like the idea of the premise, but I couldn't get that going. So a couple of short stories here and there, and a couple of comic book scripts, but that's it. This was definitely the first time I wrote, draw, inked, colored, lettered, and wrote my own comic. And I definitely like that much better than working with a writer. So
So, when you did the lettering, did you hand letter it, or is it di a digital font?
it's digital. Lettering was very new to me. That was the one skill set that I had never even come close to attempting. I had worked in Illustrator and Photoshop, and I'd done all of the parts of the comic, except for lettering. I'd done design, logo design, website design, but lettering is such again, it's a unique, specific skill. I
Yeah.
didn't really have, I didn't have any experience with it. So I didn't want to attempt a traditional lettering when I could barely get the digital to kind of like settle in my brain a little bit.
Mm.
Maybe someday though. I like the idea of doing traditional lettering, so maybe I'll take a crack at it.
I think it would work with the style that you're going with, though the lettering now works too, but
Yeah, I at minimum, so Illustrator lets you actually create a font based on your writing pretty
mm,
simply. And I bought a plugin for that. So I have started to kind of come up with my own at least handwritten font, and then it would be converted to digital, which might be the ultimate solution for me. So it's a little bit half and half. So I might try that.
and w when you were going through creating, were you studying up on like some of the skill sets that go into comic creating, like the flow of the dialogue looms and
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't want to say every comic book like creation book, but pretty close. I mean,
Mhm.
all the DC how-tos and the Marvel how-tos, Alan Moore, Peter David, Scott McCloud, Will Eisner. I mean, everyone that I know of, I've read.
Mm.
So I've definitely read up on all of that stuff. That's what I do when I can't physically be at a drawing table creating stuff. I'm learning as much about it as I can. So definitely the flow. I feel like I had to do a couple of revisions that first short story to get it to where I wanted it. But now I feel it's pretty natural because when I'm drawing now, I'm thinking of lettering and placement and flow. So I feel like that whole like process has gelled for me.
And then going back a little bit, when you got into comic books, what were your main ones that you enjoyed reading? characters or
Yeah.
artists.
So the when I was growing up, we had a newsstand. So, options were limited. We had, I
Hmm.
think, one spinner rack of comics, and whatever the nice lady that ran the newsstand decided to order that month is what we got. So out of that selection, Thor was one of my favorites for sure. Daredevil, Spider-Man, those were Avengers, things like that. Anything sort of on the margins I didn't even know about. Like had never seen a Defenders comic before, or Invaders, or even the Dracula stuff. I didn't even know that stuff existed because pre-internet, anything. So it was a long time before I knew there was like another world of comics out there that I didn't even have access to. So pretty mainstream Marvel, not much DC. DC was a little harder to get into, and the characters, I don't know, they weren't quite as flashy as Marvel, I don't think.
Yeah.
But I did like some of the funny stuff too. So I loved Gru, which is sort of like a comic, like a comic version of Conan the Barbarian. I loved Spider Ham. So I love the fact that he's popular now because I was like, as far as I knew, I was the only person that knew Spider Ham, Peter Porker.
Hmm.
But with the movie now, he's popular. Captain Carrot and the Amazing Zoo Crew. That was a DC book, but I loved the anthropomorphic stuff too. Yeah, those are probably my some of my favorite books. I'm sure I'm missing some, but mainstream stuff for sure.
You definitely have a satirical hint to your humor in your book, like with the letters from the pneumatic.
Yeah, yeah. I like humor, and not
Yeah.
necessarily like a jokey or like a humorous book, but I like having humor in things. I like it
Hmm.
as an element. When I think of some of my favorite movies or books, yeah, there could be horror elements and all action adventure, but there's a little bit of humor at least. I feel like if I read a book with no humor at all, it would feel weird to me.
Yeah.
The term I use is it feels soulless. That's the
Mm.
best word I can think of. There's something less human about it if there's no humor. I mean, if
Yeah.
you listen to like it could be army vets or neurosurgeons during a surgery. Everybody makes jokes at every opportunity. It could be like in crisis mode. It could be, so I feel like humor is everywhere all the time. So not having it in a book is it makes it feel fake in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. It goes kind of takes out a little bit of the spice, makes it bland,
Yeah.
characterless.
It
Uh,
feels like you read how to plot a comic
yeah.
and you followed those points and now you have a comic. It is a finished comic, but there's just something missing.
Yeah. And then out of the do you read a lot of crowdfunding comics, or since you've been making comics, do you not have a lot of time to
I
sit
do
down and
back
read?
I back a lot of books. Yeah, as far as my time, I try to make my way through them. So, you know, it all depends.
Any favorites so far? Or
The crowdfunding that I've received, that's a good question. I'm trying to think that again, my to read pile is huge. Which ones have I actually read? I mean, I just got Tricks and Treats from Ben Soto and his brother, but I haven't had a chance to read that. This is an older one, but Ron Friends and Sal Buscema had a crowdfunder, which I did get a chance to read that. I'm totally blanking on these books. John's Longbox has Heroic Tales, which I sort of got a preview of it, so I know that book. That's a great book.
Mhm.
Um, Brian Baugh, obviously, Wolf and Batsy stuff is really good. Um, man, yeah, Samurex was pretty cool. Um, it was interesting. It was kind of a different take on layouts. I think, and I haven't talked to him, but uh, I think he's a designer by trade, and he like lays out his book like that, which is it's a really cool, different way. for a comic book to be sort of laid out. So that was interesting. Yeah, yeah, I'm sure I could sit here and like rack my brain, but I back a lot. I read less, but
Yeah.
you know how that is.
Yeah, especially when you're working, get
Yep.
any Aaron Lopresti?
No, and the strangest thing is, like his books look right up my alley. Like
Yeah,
they look like the book that I would love to do. And it was one of those deals where you get reminded, there's a campaign, and you're like, oh, I gotta back that. Oh, I gotta back that. And then you just totally forget, and everybody's talking about it, and you're like, damn it.
yeah, they're
Um,
good books. But he sells them on his website, so there's still
yeah,
a
yeah,
chance.
yeah. I have to pick those up. I also want to pick up Groken by
Mm.
um,
Ke
uh,
Kenneth Rockefeller.
yes, he's an
I
amazing artist. Yeah.
I do want to pick those up too. I haven't picked those ones up, but they do
I
look
mean,
interesting.
the thing, unfortunately, about crowdfunders, it's unavoidable, is they're really expensive.
Yeah.
And I still go to a comic book shop and I pick
Mm.
up, a handful of books. I don't have
Yeah.
to pay $20 in shipping, and I don't have to.
Yeah.
So I find that I read a lot more just floppies from my local comic book shop than I do the crowdfunding stuff, just because there's an impediment, to that. So
So when you get the floppies from the local comic book shop, are you getting mostly like back issues or do you get some of the newer ones too?
So for a while, I was just getting back issues, sort of filling out my runs. But past couple of months, I've been getting some new books that I've actually quite liked. I got the Transformers stuff. I got the new Conan stuff. I got Batman and Dylan Dog, which I thought was really good. So I have been just randomly picking things
Mhm.
that I have to admit were actually pretty good. They're still different.
Yeah.
They're different, but they're still good.
Mhm.
I bought this collected Rick Remender trade. I don't have it here, but it's seven first issues of seven series.
Mhm.
It was $10 for amazing deal. And I'm like 4 issues into it. I'm like, these are all really good books. So I'm actually pretty like more hopeful about the mainstream than in the past. So
Yeah. I've read one called Minor Threats, which was okay, but the it gets a little bit too much cursing for my taste.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, again,
Yeah.
we'll never go back, and I don't think we'll capture sort of the old stuff. Um,
Well, I think we're on the
well,
right road with some of these.
yeah, I have to sell some.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, like yours and Aaron Lopresti's so far have been my favorites.
Oh wow,
It's a
thank
good
you.
story, good characters, fun art. So I think there's hope for the future.
Yeah, yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
I think that the one thing I've always been a little concerned about is how old before you start to sort of lose it for an artist. And I saw David Finch mention something the other day, but this kind of hit me like a year or two ago. I was reading, well, it was more than that, but I was reading Contract with God from Will Eisner.
Mhm.
And the art is it's just amazing. It's the best art I've ever seen him do. And I put it down. I'm like, this is amazing. And then I looked at the date. I'm like, wait a minute, when was this published? I mean, he was in his late 60s, maybe early 70s, and he's doing this incredible art. So that really made me feel better that unfortunately we see a lot of artists that kind of degrade over time, but it doesn't have to be the case. John
Yeah.
Buscema was doing a book at 74 and it
Mhm.
was great. So
Yeah. Yeah, it really depends on like how you take care of yourself and your mental faculties and physical health towards the end.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but at least it's not, you
Yeah.
know. it's not inevitable that you slowly decline in skill
Yeah.
set. So it's like you're always still working towards something, and I think that's the key.
Yeah, and probably also always having the mindset of willingness to learn and not just settling,
Yeah, and
possibly.
just repeating stuff because I understand how that happens. Like I've drawn Horace, I don't know, 1,000 times, and there are times where I think, well, maybe I can just simplify this and I can simplify that. And maybe I'll simplify this. And I can see mentally how all of a sudden you're taking shortcuts for
Hmm.
everything. So I'm very conscious about that. But I can see how that happens. You know, you've done it a million times.
So I know you mentioned in a previous stream about making a first volume of Horus after the mini series. So how would that be different than the mini series itself? Would it be more a continual story? Give me
Yeah, I think originally, so the current story that you're reading right now was never meant to be chopped up into single issues. It was supposed to be one continuous story.
Oh, okay.
But due to the publisher's demands, I had to cut things up, which I'm actually happy with how I was able to cut it up. But you can still tell it's one story. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not self-contained issues. So at first, I was going to do just self-contained issues after this, starting with issue one and just going as high up as I could. I have since changed my mind because I think what I'm going to do is essentially break things out into years. So
Hmm.
I'm going to spend a year and do as many pages, as much story as I can, put it out. That's issue one, you know, or whatever we want to call it. Maybe it'll be volume one, volume two, or whatever. So one might be a 24 page or one might be 55. So like the length might change, from floppy to graphic novel, but it's going to be a self-contained story.
Oh, okay. Yeah, some of the stories did kind of remind me of Hellboy, but it's because of the landscape that it's in. It's in that cosmic horror kind
Yeah.
of.
Yeah, I've definitely heard the Hellboy comparison before, and that's high praise for sure.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't use that just because I don't want like the tone is very different from a
Mm,
Hellboy book.
yeah, it's more com well, there's comedy in the other one, but it gets a little bit darker.
Yeah, yeah. So I try not to use that comparison, but that's the closest thing that I can think of. There's really not another occult investigator similar to Horus out there. So
Well, it was specifically one of the stories, just kind of the setup of it, just um like when he's talking to the antiquarian
yeah.
and he's telling the story of like um the research he was doing kind of
Mhm.
reminded me of a story, but it's a ape sapien story called The Devil Doesn't Jest, where
Okay.
it's the husband has a wife and kid and sorry, yeah, husband, wife and kid, and he's like dabbling into the occult and summons a creature that winds up causing trouble. But
Yeah.
he's a little bit braver than the other guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's all Lovecraft stuff,
Yeah.
and it's all, I don't want to say they're tropes, but they are,
Yeah.
the guy who experiments into the occult and bad things happen. So
Yeah.
you'll see that a lot, and I love that like setup. As long as you can do something a little interesting with it, then I have no problem sort of treading the same stuff. I mean, and honestly, Lovecraft pulled a lot of stuff from older authors on top of that. So it's very much just this. It's a metaphor for knowledge being dangerous, essentially.
Yeah. And so when did you get into like Lovecraft horror and the occult i- ideas?
So, I mean, I started. I think one of the first books I really got into was there's an author called Brian Lumley, and he did a series of vampire books called Necroscope. I loved them. And maybe I was 13, 14, something like that. And I absolutely love this series of books. And I'm like, okay, well, what else has he written? So I start finding everything that this guy has written, going back to the 70s. And he has a lot of Lovecraftian type stuff, but it's a little different. It's if Lovecraft had heroes that fought back, which
Mm,
rarely happens in Lovecraft. There's, I think, the Dunwich Horror is the only thing that I can think of where the heroes kind of fight back. But I loved that, and I didn't at the time. I didn't know who Lovecraft was. Again, no internet, no, you
yeah.
know. That's right. I'm just going through bookstores, picking up books, basically. And then I saw something from this author talking about Lovecraft. I'm like, oh, who's this? Who's this Lovecraft guy? So then I started picking up Lovecraft and really liking that stuff. So it's kind of this route of you find an author, you see who inspired them, you read that stuff, then you find out who inspired them and you read their stuff. So I would say pretty early, 13, 14, admittedly not age appropriate at the time.
Yeah.
But going into a bookstore and picking up a book, you can buy whatever book you want.
Hmm.
Huge influence on me, so much so that my next series is going to be like a vampire monster hunter type thing. Very different tone, very different art style,
Okay.
and it's a way to kind of recapture a little bit of that atmosphere from those Necroscope books.
And do you think you'll do it at the same time as Horace,
I
or are
think,
you
yeah,
after?
the goal is after the 5 issue miniseries, I'll switch over to for a year, do this other title, then go back to Horse, and maybe swap every year, going back and forth.
Mm,
I like splitting up into years just because it's a lot easier for crowdfunding. Once a year,
yeah.
I'll have a book and it'll be ready to go, and then whatever page number that is. So
And you initially published through Alterna, right?
right,
And that was when they were accepting submissions, or how did that come about?
yeah, they were accepting. This
Not
was
commissions, but submissions, yeah.
yeah, this was I'm trying to think of what early 2020 maybe, and I only submitted to a few publishers just because a lot of the publishers didn't look like my book, so I just assumed right off the bat they're not gonna accept it. In retrospect, I probably should have sent out to more publishers, but that's fine. I got picked up, and then issue one went through, issue two went through, issue three was supposed to be in a crowdfunder. Um, and then Alterna just pulled it because I said after issue three was going to be my last issue. Pete got mad and then pulled it from the campaign. So then I published issue three on my own, and then moving forward, and I didn't do a crowdfunder for issue three. Issue three was just on my website because I wanted to
Okay.
get it out. I was trying to, people were expecting it with the crowdfunder. When that got canceled, I just wanted to get out as quick as possible, so I just put it on my website.
And
But go ahead.
real quick,
Yeah.
do you mind me delving in a little deeper on
No,
like
go. Yeah.
why you decided to
Yeah.
quit after?
There were definitely some issues as far as I'll leave personality stuff aside for the moment,
Mm,
but when your book's being published and you're doing the writing, coloring, you're doing everything on it.
hmm.
Um, the publisher really is there to publish the book. They're not your editor. They shouldn't really have any say in the direction of things and how you handle things. And there was a lot more feedback on that than I really thought was appropriate for a publisher. Again,
Hmm.
if you have an editor, then you expect that and you should be open to it. And I have people that essentially do editing for me. So there was a lot of pushback on what I was doing and how I was doing it, to the degree that, as an artist, it starts to get in your head a little bit.
Hmm.
And then when you realize that's affecting the quality of your art, so I'm like, okay, well, this has to change because I can't let it affect the art. It can it could be a little bit of feedback that rolls off your back. That's one thing. But if it's to the degree where when I'm sitting down to draw a horse, it's be a problem, then I've got to make a change. So yeah, I figured, well, issue three is going to go out for the crowdfunder. I was given as much like heads up. I'm like, you know what? I don't want you to order a bunch of extra books and get stuck with them. You can, if I give you a heads up, you can get another title to, I was the employee giving 4 months notice.
Hmm.
Turns out the employer wanted to fire me because, you know what I mean? It's one of those
Yes.
situations.
Yeah.
Like, okay. You have a personality side too. Like you still have a relationship, business relationship that if personalities don't jive, that can be just as harmful as anything else, on the
Yeah.
business side. So that's it.
So, what other publishers did you submit to?
Uh, wow. What is the name of that one? It's not Top Cow. I'm blanking on it. It's been 4 years. It was, I can't even think of the name. There's only one other publisher that seemed like it might be more in line with my stuff, but I never heard back from them.
Mm.
Yeah, again, in retrospect, I should have sent it out everywhere. I mean, why
Hmm.
not? Um, I had some pretty good feedback. I had like a professional critique the book, and he said, you know what, this is as good. He said you can. He said I could see this getting published by any of the major publishers,
Yeah.
and that was on. Yeah, that was enough to give me enough like confidence to start sending it out. So
Yeah. Yeah. Only one critique about the cover is you probably should put your name on it bigger.
yeah,
Yeah.
like it's on the spine. Should I put it on the cover?
Yeah. That's usually how they suggest to do it when you're
I will.
publishing your own book.
Yeah, maybe I will do that. I mean, it's inside, but yeah,
Yeah.
I need my name more places, maybe.
Yeah. And then, so you publish this through Amazon, the kiddie, forgot the term for it. So how was that? I know you had to change formats a little bit and
Yeah, it was a learning process for sure, but uh, I I wanted to go through the whole process to see the quality of the book, and then I'm like, okay, it's just another avenue for people to get the book, which, as far as I'm concerned, you need as many avenues as possible.
yeah.
Some people are on Amazon every single day, and it's such a low barrier for them to hit add to cart and then free shipping, and they get it in the mail.
Hmm.
And once I got the proofs and I liked the quality, I said, I'm definitely going to do this for everything. I mean, why not at that point? But like you said, I had to reformat every single page. It was obnoxious. But now that I have it, it's a matter of just, resubmitting and publishing. But that initial setup was pretty difficult.
And then do you have a lot of sales yet to see like how the royalties are doing from that or
Not a lot of sales yet. I did see the royalties. So I think for a US book, it might be like $4 or $5 a book, which isn't bad. Um, I wanted to make it as cheap as I could and still have, a little bit of profit in order to, take the time to do the next book, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah.
I haven't pushed it a ton, but the book is available on my website now as floppies. It's available on Amazon as the volume. Um, we'll see. You know, I don't. I haven't done my own crowdfunder, and I really do think that that is the best way to get your book out.
Mhm.
Um, More people, for some reason, pay attention to that than me just saying, "Hey, the book's available on my website." You know, it it just there's an excitement to crowdfunding that people really get into. There's the time limit, the sense of urgency. the stretch goals, all that kind of stuff. So I'm definitely going to be doing that in the future. And then I'll be able to compare, the difference between just posting it on a website and doing a crowdfunder. Yeah, this is my contact page or my about us page.
Yeah, the team.
Yeah, that's actually
Like,
in the Athenaeum in Rhode Island. It's a place that Lovecraft frequented very often.
very cool. Yeah, that is one of my favorite scenes is the library and then the house made of books, which was very clever.
Cool.
And the
Thank you.
armor made of books.
Yeah, you know, I've always been obsessed with books, and they're kind of a pain to draw. I'm not gonna lie.
Hmm. Yeah.
The book bug was a fun character, but man, drawing those books every single time in every different angle, that it gets pretty tedious and difficult with that. So in the future, you may see less books. We'll see.
Well, like each time he gets attacked, right, a book falls off.
I should have done that. Yeah, I should have. And then by the end, no more books, and he's vulnerable.
Yeah. And then you also have a YouTube channel where you're streaming.
Yeah, so the YouTube channel, once a week, I do a live stream. It's an hour long, and I'm usually doing inking of either a page or sort of a promo piece, sometimes just a random illustration that I'm doing.
Are you
Uh,
seeing the YouTube channel page or
yeah, yep.
okay.
Yeah, and it's fun. I kind of look at it as it's a place that, for the most part, people know that I'll be at 3 o'clock on Sundays, and if they want to chat or if they want to get in contact with me live, they can. It's been fun, having people in chat, sometimes joining is very different than the solitary, effort at the desk 8 hours. So it's a nice time to break things up a bit.
And do you do cons too or
I have I haven't done a lot yet. The first con I did was it was a local one, very small. It was just for a day, but it was fun. I really enjoy going to these conventions and meeting people. Some people are very introverted, and to them, it's literal torture.
yeah.
But I like it. So I'll at least do a few a year. I did Pittsburgh Comic Con this year, and I did Plastic City in Massachusetts. They were both a lot of fun. So I'll probably pick a couple a year because it does, there's some effort involved. Sometimes driving, flying, bringing all your stuff. It's definitely effort,
Mm.
but I think you have to. It's the other avenue again to get your name in the book out there. So
Yeah.
I actually think it's necessary. But unless you're a hugely famous person already, then it's another avenue.
Yeah. Just like YouTube's an avenue,
Yep.
direct commercials basically to your audience
Yeah.
when you crowdfund. But yeah, if you ever come to Washington, there's a SummerCon, which is at the Puyallup State Fair grounds.
Okay.
It's a pretty good con.
Yeah, I need to just go to some conventions too and not actually do a table. I do miss doing that. It's funny because you go to a convention
Mhm.
and you're surrounded by box and boxes of all these comics, and you're like, I don't have time to like search through them. So I would just I do like I'd run, I'd like flip through, maybe grab a book, come back. Um, yeah, so I need to just hit some conventions as a consumer.
Mhm. And then I noticed you also make resin models. Well, do you make them yourself or?
Yeah, so the resin model stuff before I did before I really got into the Horace H. Hoover and the comics full time, not full time, but full focus, we'll say. I did a lot of sculpting. ZBrush was my main sort of tool that I used. I did sculpting for freelance projects, for personal projects. It was just sort of my go-to. So my goal was actually to do sculpting as my business, not do comic books or illustration. It was just sculpting. So this was before COVID, and I had what I do is I sculpt the models. Some of them I 3D print, and then I would do molds and castings of them and then sell them. But the more complex ones that you'll see, I actually just do the ZBrush file, and then a company will actually fabricate it and then send me the model. So I had amassed a bunch of inventory right before COVID of all these resin models. And and then when COVID hit, there were no more conventions. There was, I was going to get a table. I was going to start selling these things, and then, the world shut down. So that's when I said, okay, well, I need to do something else. And then I've been wanting to do a comic book. I'll just jump into that. And now that the comic book is like well on its way, and I feel pretty comfortable about, all of the things that I need to do, I'm pulling all of those resin models back out of inventory and basically just selling them on Etsy. I don't know if I'll ever do conventions for them, but just posting them for people to buy. They're a lot of fun. It's one thing seeing your creation as a comic. It's another when it's, a 3D object holding in your
Yeah.
hand. So yeah,
And
that's
it
the
could,
horse. Go ahead.
when you do crowdfunding, you can have it as a perk or as part of the crowdfund too.
Yep. Yeah. I don't know how much crossover there is for comic book fans and resin model kits. I haven't found a lot, but it's okay. It's fine. There is a little bit of crossover, so whenever that happens, it's great. If not, they stay in their own little corners of the geek world, and
Was this to reference Norman Rockwell a little bit?
yeah, this was a. I was doing a lot of sketch cards for a while. I loved the sketch card. It was so much fun for me.
Mhm. Oh yeah, and this is one of the advertisements that's in the book. So did you do that to replace the original like Alterna advertisements that were, or just for?
No, this was supposed. So there were a few things that were cut out of the alternative stuff that I wanted to put back in, and this was one of them.
Mm,
It's a fake board game based on the issue one. Something that happened, an event that happens in issue one. I just
yeah.
thought that was a lot of fun. I was so bummed whenever it got canceled or got cut.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I did it basically for this. I had to do a 3D model of these houses with this, big tentacle. And then I found some not clip art, but stock art of a family playing a board game. And I kind of, meshed them together.
Yeah, you can see
Um,
the white from the.
yeah. And that's the best part about like the 80s stuff.
Hmm.
Uh, like I can purposely do things incorrectly. Like if you go back to the first, like the page, like that font, like in the spacing it's purposefully bad. I basically took like 80s ads and I would match things up because they weren't very design oriented back then.
Hmm.
So, all of
Made it.
those things add to it.
Yeah. And do you eventually plan on actually making some of this stuff into reality, like the board game or?
I have thought about doing card games and board games before. All of that would have to come after issue 5, but
Hmm.
I've definitely looked into it because I love that kind of stuff. There's no reason not to, because especially right now, there's so many tools online where if you want to do a prototype board game with pieces, you can absolutely do that now. So it's the time to do it.
And you ink with a brush. So did have you tried inking with pen, or are you just a brush guy from when you went to art school or?
So originally always used a pen, like a quill nib pen. That was my go-to for many, many, many years. And the brush it was sort of it was a way to quickly do things. At first, it was just, how do I quickly get some art in this game? So I just started to pull out a brush because every time I used a pen, like this drawing's going to take me forever. So it was out of necessity doing the game art. And then eventually I said, you know what? That the brush will lend itself to that old style. So I've stuck with it. And I think I'll probably go back and forth depending on
Mhm.
the title. So some titles might use pen and ink, some might use brush. So I'm not married to the brush 100%. I like varying things up a bit. So we'll see.
Yeah, so like if you were to do like say a comic that takes place present day or maybe 90s and stuff like that, you do like the pen.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't like the brush because I use it for everything. I use it for backgrounds and which
Mhm.
is very difficult. Most people use pens in the backgrounds to keep the straight
Yeah.
edges. Um, but for this, I was very conscious of using the brush for everything. And it's a style. If I was working on like some sci-fi dystopian future with a lot of technology, I wouldn't use a brush, I would probably
Okay.
use a pen. So it depends on subject matter
Mm.
and things like that.
And then so you s- you're not doing comics full time yet or
I am not. I am a programmer by trade. So
okay. So
yeah.
what type of stuff do you work on in your day job?
I I mean, I have a very long career in programming. I did game development for a good 10, 11 years. Currently, I'm doing mobile development, so iOS apps, things like that. Games were fun, but the past couple of years, I just decided to do mobile stuff instead. Yeah, as far as what I do a lot of. It's going to sound so boring, but um, pharmaceutical companies do very big conventions and trade shows
Okay.
where they spend a whole bunch of money and essentially they spend a lot of money in their booths to get people to come in and talk about doctor stuff. um, so sometimes they're games, sometimes they're just boring apps to pull data, things like that. So it's interesting on the technical level, but not on the we'll say user on the front end level. I've done some cool games in the past, but even that, they're very simple, quick games.
So what drove you into going into programming?
I had a need to eat, so I figured I could try to get a job doing art, or I could actually afford to eat. Because when I graduated school, I was living in Erie at the time, and not a lot of opportunity in Erie. It was very difficult to find a job just really doing anything that could support a human being.
Mhm.
So, one of the things I did do was I worked at Barnes and Noble for about 6 months, and I noticed a lot of people were buying computer books on programming. And I mean, I was on the internet. It's not like I didn't know technology, but I didn't really know the programming side of it. So I had a computer. I saw people buying books. So I started buying books. I taught myself. And then in about maybe a year and a half, I got a job in an advertising agency doing programming. And I've been doing it ever since.
Oh, well.
But I will say one of the reasons I got that job at the advertising agency was because I could do design and art stuff too. So I did do programming, but occasionally I would do illustration for this advertising agency. So it wasn't a complete loss for me. I
Mhm.
was able to leverage the art into something.
Yeah.
Yeah, this
So
is this is an example of like a pen and ink drawing I might do. It was a sketch, but
what bad sitcoms were you watching?
what's that?
Oh, it says futzing
Oh,
or watching a sitcom.
yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I do play a lot in the background, and I
Yeah.
just kind of turn off my brain. This was supposed to be for a short box for Alterna.
Oh,
one
okay.
side of it. Uh, so I might do something with it eventually, but it was a fun drawing.
Mhm. Looks like it. And then, um, when you do work on pages or if you're writing a script, do you need absolute quiet or do you listen to stuff in the background?
Well, there's definitely different stages. I
Hmm.
would say when I'm writing a script, I like music with no words generally, because that's the most difficult part. Or I mean, if there is a particular album that is evocative in some way for the subject matter, then I'll put that on. But generally, I like I'm not going to watch TV while I'm writing or anything like that. It's music limited. Maybe it's some jazz. Maybe like I said, evocative of something else. Um, then whenever I am thumbnailing, I can usually have something on in the background. Again, this is in stages. If I'm drawing, yeah, but I sometimes I have to turn it off because those are the hardest parts.
Hmm.
Inking is the easiest. It's just you turn off your brain, the drawing is already done, all of the really heavy lifting has been done.
Hmm.
I could ink, you know, during the apocalypse. I don't think there could be bombs going off and it probably wouldn't bother me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so depending on what you're doing, it kind of dictates what I listen to.
Yeah, and it also kind of depends on the artist too, because heard I've interviewed other people too, and like Gary Martin says that he can listen to stuff while he's inking, but when it's more of like doing pencils, he has to concentrate more.
Yeah.
So,
There's definitely a lot more thinking during the layout stage,
mhm.
which kind of sucks, but that's fine.
This is a nice pen work.
Yeah, again, just a little sketch stuff for later on. I would like the plan is to do a very like Frankenstein, Bernie Wrightson-esque illustration of the Christmas Carol, which is my
Oh,
favorite
nice.
story. So I will work up to that, I think, over the next couple of years. It would be nice to do something like that.
I like the Christmas Carol too.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
my favorite.
do you like any of the film adaptations or?
I actually like virtually all of them for different reasons. I think the
Mm.
story is so good that even the bad ones are still pretty good. Um, I mean, I will say, I just for the first time saw the Muppet version
Oh
a,
yeah.
a couple of years ago, and it was fantastic. It was so much better. I mean, because Michael Caine, he to him it is like a Christmas. It's not a funny version of a Christmas Carol. He acts like he's like dead serious, and man, is it good.
That's one of
So
the ones that I grew up on is the Muppet one.
that's so good. And actually, the set design I is
Hmm.
amazing for that. It's truly, yeah, it doesn't get enough credit, I don't think.
Yeah. That one and the original like 1933 or 31. I don't remember the exact date, but those are my two favorites of
Yeah,
the
is that the one where
the
is it
very
where he's
first.
invisible? Like I think the ghost is invisible, or like I'm thinking of a version. It might not be the 30s, maybe it was the 50s. There's a version where Jacob Marley's invisible. Um, anyway, but yeah,
Hmm. I'd have to rewatch it. It's been a little bit since I've seen it, but there's the book house.
yeah, I really is absolute torture for me. But
Yeah,
you know, in the end, you just have to think about the end product
yeah,
and just hope that works out. So
because if you're not careful, it might just look like squares, but
yes, that was really difficult. Yeah, because sometimes you put the spines going one way, sometimes you have to put them the other. If they were all aligned, I found out the hard way a few times that I'm like, oh, they're too similar, they're too different. It was pretty
Mhm.
difficult.
And then, did you make your own trailers
I
for
did.
this?
Yeah, that comes back to the sort of the multidiscipline like
Yeah.
advertising stuff. So I know After Effects, which is good and bad.
Hmm.
It took me a while to do that trailer, and I kept on thinking, I'm like, ugh, is a trailer worth it? Is anybody gonna watch it? But I'm like, I need one good trailer at least. So it took me a while, but I hacked it out.
Yeah. I use After Effects because when I went through Cornish because I went for design. So I know a little bit about it, but I'm out of practice on it. So it definitely take a learning curve to get back into it.
Yeah, it's a unique piece of software. There's
Hmm.
really nothing like it. So it's a good to have in your toolbox, at least in a limited way, but
Hmm.
it can eat up a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was a fun 3D sculpt. So what this is supposed to be, and I actually got this printed. It's not for sale because it was just a one-off, and they're about this, each one's about this big.
Oh wow.
So the idea is you put one in this room and then the feet hanging out in a different
Yeah.
room or something like that.
Like the cover.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And now,
Yeah.
is this a creature that's going to actually appear in the story or
Eventually, yeah. Like all
yeah.
of the stuff, all of the little marketing images and sketches, all of that stuff is planned, but getting to it takes a long time. Like, so yeah, everything will be used eventually, but I don't know when.
Mhm.
Like this is a perfect example. What I try to do is every night I spend like an hour or two essentially practicing or doing concept art. So for this, I start doing concept art, and this guy is a kind of a monster egg carrier. He
Okay.
sells like monster eggs of different types. So I like doing this because whenever the time comes for me to write a story, I have this guy sort of fleshed out to some
Hmm.
degree. So if when you're looking for story ideas in the beginning, a lot of it is pulling from things you've read, things you've seen. But once you amass your own character like group and worlds, like you can pull from your own stuff. And
Hmm.
I think that's really where interesting things start to connect.
Yeah. And so you went to art. Was it art school that you went to? Yeah, you said that.
Yeah, I went to
Fine art.
Edinburgh, fine art degree and focus in drawing.
Yeah. So did you ever get into like the classes of doing visual development, or is that? I know that's more entertainment art.
Yeah, when I was going to school, there wasn't really anything like that. It was all traditional fine art. So drawing, painting, figure studies. I had some 2D design type stuff, but
Mm.
it was it was nothing that could be construed as like a real design course.
So, so what made you decide to go for fine arts initially?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. I thought that was my only option, really.
Mm,
I don't I could be wrong, but at the time, I don't even think there was like an illustration degree. Not that I was even thinking illustration. I thought, when I was in high school, I was doing illustrations, very
hmm.
detailed illustrations. You look at
Hmm.
the college, they don't have an illustration degree. My only option is fine art. So I really went head first into the fine art part of it.
Mm. Do you
So
still have
that's,
any drawings from like high school and stuff?
I do have a few. There's one in particular. that is behind me that it was like a pen and ink drawing that it's pretty good for like 14, I have to admit. It's like a
Do,
fantasy skull skeleton thing.
do you mind showing it?
Yeah, no, yeah, 1 second.
Let me stop sharing so it's a little bit bigger.
Yeah, well, I don't know how this is going to come across here, but so this is all like stippling.
Nice.
I mean,
That's very cool.
yeah. So like as a very young, and this is pen and ink. This is not
You d
technical pen. So,
you definitely had a good design sense in your characters
oh, thank
there.
you.
Were you taking art classes in high school too, or?
Yeah, my art program in school was pretty good. I feel like I probably had a little better art program than other people did. It's
Mm,
hard for me to compare
gauge?
completely, but I do hear other people's experiences, and I think mine was a step above other people's high school experiences. So by the time I got to college, I remember my first drawing class was essentially you sit down, here's a drawing table, here's some charcoal, here's a still life. And the idea is that we're going to gauge everybody's skill at that point. So we sit
Hmm.
down, I don't know, I spend 20, 30 minutes. And at this point, everybody's nervous because you have no idea the levels of other people. And
Hmm.
you don't want to be like the worst person in class.
Hmm.
And I came from a very small high school. So I was the best, but it was very small, like I
Hmm.
knew that. So after about 30 minutes, we put our stuff up against the wall, and my stuff objectively is by far better than everybody else's. I'm like, whew, that's a load off, right? And the professor's like, so this is really good. You have light, you have shadow, you have, all of these things. He's like, this is pretty advanced. You obviously had, private lessons or whatever. I'm like, no, I never had private lessons. He's like, well, you did. And I'm like, I didn't. So they started arguing with me, that I must have had private lessons or something, outside of school to be this advanced, freshman year or whatever. So that makes me think that my high school professors or teachers
Hmm.
were much more advanced than others. That's
Yeah,
I'm assuming that's the case.
possibly. Or you're just a prodigy that would just.
Well, that's I'm not though. So it's like, all right, well, so I fondly look at my old teachers. I'm like, thank you for
Yeah.
taking more time with me than, other teachers did at that time.
So did your brothers draw too, or were they just into comics when you were younger?
Um, no, one of my brothers drew for a little bit, but not much after that. That's it. Yeah, there really wasn't anybody doing any drawing. Like I said, my one of my brothers started, I'm trying to think, when he was really young, he drew a little bit, but it didn't last. And I just kind of, I stupidly hung on to the skill.
As we all have, that are
Yeah.
pursuing comics.
Pry it out of our cold, dead hands, basically.
Yeah, born with pencils in our hands
Yeah.
or ink brushes, depending on the style.
Yeah. Well, actually, or anything that'll make a mark. I think that's the thing. It's like I was just talking with somebody about this. He used to play, my oldest brother used to play D&D, and he had this like it was a little box of miniatures, and this is a long time ago, and they were made out of lead a long time ago.
Hmm.
I didn't know that. Nobody knew that, whatever. So I'm like, oh, hey, look, these things make marks. So I would draw with these miniatures like on paper because they were lead and they would make a mark. Meanwhile,
Hmm.
I wore down these miniatures down to like these nubs or whatever. So yeah, if it makes a mark and you use it, then you're probably an artist.
Yeah. And one thing I've noticed is that quite a few comic artists have brothers. Like Aaron
Interesting.
Lopresti, Gary Martin, you,
Hmm.
uh, Phil Diaz. Well, he's a comic writer, but he works with his brother.
That's interesting. I wonder if there
Yeah,
is some sort of correlation of
yeah.
that. Yeah. Like if you don't have like another sibling or something, you're less likely to do creative stuff. I wonder about that. That's interesting.
Though I do know, like, I've heard Rainey mention that she was an only child, so
Hmm.
it varies, I guess.
Sure, I'm sure there's outliers. Yeah.
But it's just something interesting that I've noticed that is like quite a few. Another person I interviewed, Dan Lawless, also had brothers, but he's the seventh kid of eight kids.
Wow. I mean, I'm the fourth, but seven, that's something special.
Yes, so you're the fourth, so you're the youngest, and
Yeah.
all brothers, or
Yeah, all brothers, yeah. We're all about a year apart or so.
oh,
So
okay. Were you a
uh,
rowdy bunch or just more
we
mellow?
were, we were. I mean, when you're that close in age, there's a lot of fighting and punching, and I think if there's a bigger age gap, people are less likely like to beat on little brothers, but not when you're like a year apart or so.
Mm, that's true. And then, do you watch a lot of movies too, or were you more into books and
Um,
comic books?
I I watched a decent amount of movies, but like when I was growing up, we had HBO, and at the
Mhm.
time, HBO played the same four movies over and over and over again. So did we watch them? Yes, but it was the same, 10 movies over like 6 years. So I know some movies really, really, really well, but we didn't really go to the movies very often. Um, when I was in college, we definitely caught up in a lot of old movies because that's all we did. We were in Edinburgh. There was nothing to do. We would just go rent movies for the weekend and watch old movies we never saw before. So
Mm,
I, I was really big into movies. I'm less so now just because I don't think they're quite as good. Um,
mm,
but I used to be really into movies. I think the 90s was an incredible time for movies, and
mm,
even in the 2000s. But I don't know. I get less excited about movies now, and I know that Hollywood doesn't put out as many, et cetera, et cetera. But
yeah.
always into books, though. If it
Hmm.
really came down to it, I could have had probably an English minor in college.
Hmm.
I took a lot of English classes,
I
so
think some foreign movies are pretty good these
yeah,
days. But
yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're putting not putting out anything. I still watch movies. I'm trying to think of the most recent one that I saw that I liked. But the Conjuring series, I think is great. Um,
mm,
like those are good. Yeah, I mean, there's still definitely good movies. I there's a lot of good TV though. I'm trying to think of some series. Um, Monsieur Spade, I talked about a lot on Amazon, which is Sam Spade, but he's in sort of like his old age in France, which I thought was really well done. Um, Yeah, so I mean, I still watch stuff, but it seems like more TV than movies, I think.
mm. And do you find it helps feel like that your inspiration cup, or do you, since you're working
Yeah,
professionally, you just when you go to do something, you have an idea already, and
yeah. For me personally, the most inspiration I get is not by consuming other creative stuff. It's always about going and seeing something different. So we were in Massachusetts on our way home. We stopped at this place called Jim Thorpe, which is it's a cool little town. Basically, it's got a unique history. The architects were all from Sweden, at the turn of the century. So you look around and you see some different architecture, and I'm obsessed with architecture, obsessed.
mm,
So for me, just walking down some streets, seeing different architecture is enough sometimes to get my brain thinking about things. And there was an old mansion there, and we took a tour of the mansion. That's something else that we always do. I will tour every old house, mansion that I can find. So we're touring this thing, and there's essentially what's called an orchestrion, which is a large, it's essentially like a music box that has a bunch of instruments in it. You're going through this hallway, creepy pictures on the wall, from the 18th century or 19th century. And this music box starts going and just blaring. And I'm like,
Nice.
okay, this is a short story. So I immediately, start this short story about that. So that's where I get most of my inspiration from. Yeah, I don't really get it from other, like, consuming other creative stuff. I don't know what it is. That doesn't it could be a move or a like a maybe a soundtrack or something.
Hmm.
But yeah.
Or like an ambiance, maybe.
Yeah, atmosphere, it could pretty much anything but like watching a movie or reading a book or something. Because a lot
Mm.
of times when I do that in my head, I have to I have to keep away from that. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean? Because
Yeah.
I don't want to tread similar territory. So it almost has an opposite effect of
Hmm.
giving me inspiration.
That's cool. So, on like places that you can't go physically, have you tried watching like there's some people that do like walkarounds of the place so you see the architecture texture and stuff. Have you
Yeah,
tried?
those are pretty interesting. I'll watch those sometimes. Um, it doesn't have quite the same effect as being there,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, we all would like to travel to these crazy places, but I would also like my life. I like living. So,
Yeah.
some places you shouldn't go. But those are pretty cool. I like watching travel guides or this or that.
Hmm.
But
And the problem with them is you're only seeing what the camera sees. So it's kind of like a forced
yeah,
tourist tourism instead of actually being able to walk around and experience the place
yeah.
yourself.
I used to travel a fair amount for my last job,
Mm.
and mostly US, primarily US. But even so, just a random city, being in a random coffee shop, it's a different atmosphere, different things that you see that, like, I would be that jerk writing in a laptop in a coffee shop in some random city. I
Hmm.
know it annoyed people. It doesn't as much, I think, anymore. But at the time, people used to complain about it when it was kind of a newish thing. But I was that jerk staying there, drinking coffee, writing because it was an interesting atmosphere.
I don't see how that would be a jerk thing because you're just in the moment creating something.
Yeah, people used to complain that it would take up a seat basically because these coffee shops are busy, depending on the city. Again, this
I
is a long time ago, and I sometimes you would get pushback. I'm not saying all the time, but if there were limited seating and people wanted to sit down, they saw somebody with a laptop, they would kind of like give you the evil eye, and
okay, that makes more sense now.
yeah.
Uh, yeah. So when you go to create a script, do you already have an idea of like the character in mind? Well, I know you're currently working with Horace,
Yeah.
or do you do like the brain map where you do diff spitball ideas and then go from there?
I kind of do a little bit of back and forth,
Mm.
which is sometimes I'll write an outline of just things that come to my mind, and then I'll sit and draw. So
Mhm.
maybe I'll start coming up with a character design, and it kind of might feed back and forth. Once I have those characters, I'm like, okay, I know the story is going to be about these three things and this location. Then I'll go back and actually write out an outline with more information. But it's definitely a little bit of a back and forth in the beginning, because especially in the world of Horace H. Hoover, I can't have a boring looking character.
Mhm.
And I also can't have a wild looking character that doesn't make any sense,
Hmm.
just for the heck of it. The book bug looks the way he does for a very specific reason. That's it wasn't just like, hey, I'm just gonna have a guy that wears books. Like, okay, well, why does he wear books? Because I think that whenever I'm reading things.
Yeah.
So it's some back and forth, and once I get the reasoning for the characters, then I'll just sit and write for a very, very long time.
And it gives them a little bit more life too, because they're
Yeah.
not just a veneer.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So, and then you plan on doing the fourth and fifth issue next year. How many
Yeah.
pages are you into the fourth issue?
So right now I'm penciling like issue page 26. It's a longer issue. It's going to be 36 pages,
Nice.
which it is what it is.
Hmm.
And I actually think issue 5 is going to be like 36 pages too. So those two issues combined are going to be a chunk.
Yeah.
I know people stick to like 22 and 24. That's so hard.
Yeah.
It's
It,
hard.
especially if you have a lot you want to convey in the story, it gets
Yeah.
harder.
And
Yeah.
and I'm somebody who does, I mean, some of these pages, if I just randomly pick a page, we're talking at least one, two, three, like 6 panels, 7 panels. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
I have a page with, I think, 10 or 11 panels. It would be different if I'm just, some people just do 4 panels, 3 panels, like one, two, three, six, that's 7 panels. So
Hmm.
I'm one that tries to cram a lot in those 36 pages. I like splash pages, but I
Hmm.
also like cramming as much as I can in the pages that need
Like
it.
this was a good double page spread in the
Yeah,
library.
yeah. Thank you. That was very difficult to do. I had
Yeah.
to eyeball that perspective, for that
Mm-hmm.
curvature, and
Mm-hmm.
that was very difficult to do.
I think you were successful.
Thank you.
And that comes to from your classical training, that perspective, or do you still find that you still struggle with perspective?
Um, I don't think we ever really talked about perspective that much in school. I had to
Mm.
really do it on my own. And luckily, like I said, I love architecture. So it's fun. I mean, I didn't learn artistic perspective. I learned like architectural perspective.
Okay.
A lot of books you'll find, they don't cover like true architectural perspective. And it sucks because I'm like, hey, I want to draw. I'm going to learn perspective. And they'll watch a video and watch 2 videos and they cover the same 4 things. But I'm thinking that's not everything. And you're going to run into some issues with that.
Mm.
I had to really like dig for true architectural perspective. So there's something called measuring points and station points, and it's like a whole other level of perspective. And I'm not saying everybody should learn it, but I like if you're really serious about learning perspective, at least you should be familiar with those terms because if you really want to do something complex, you're going to run into these issues and you're going to get frustrated and you're going to bail, which is what I
Especially
did.
especially when you're like, world building, which is what you're kind of doing is,
Yep.
well, I shouldn't say kind of, you are doing that.
Yeah. I do a lot of backgrounds and a lot of things that
Yeah.
I can't fudge basically.
Hmm. Yeah. And then how proficient have you become since you started your first issue? How many pages do you get done a week?
So um it unfortunately I've gotten slower, but not
Mm,
because I'm doing a better job and because I'm putting more detail.
hmm.
It's unfortunate in a way, but for me, the pages are so much better, than they were, that it takes me longer to do it. And I'm okay with that because I know like the outcome is going to be that much better. it's difficult because you just want to get through them. You know, you
Hmm.
want to finish the book, you want to get doing, but I'm at a level now that if I put anything out that isn't my best, that it's going to be tough to look at later.
Yeah.
Like that's why I can look at issue one and I'm obviously much better than I was at issue one, but that was the best I could do at that time.
Hmm.
So it's okay when I look at it. I'm like, well, that was the best I could do at that time. Yeah, I can do better now. If I look back and I see a page where I'm like, oh, you know what? I could have done better, but I didn't. I think that would be really difficult to look at. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So each issue is the best I could do at that given time. And right now with issue four, I'm doing the best I can at this time. And I actually think this is not the best I'm ever going to do, but this is like my final style. This is how I draw, you know.
Yeah. And but you'll probably increase a little bit more so as you go along, since this is your first comic series that you're
I'm
doing
probably get
continuously.
faster. You know what I mean? Like I'll be able to
Yeah.
do this quality, but I'll be able to
Hmm.
do it faster. I think that's
Hmm.
how it's supposed to work
Yeah.
from what people tell me. But we'll
Um,
see.
but yeah, I mean, who knows what the future holds, right?
Yeah, yeah. I might experiment with different styles too, you know.
Mhm. That's a nice style. And do you have friends that create comics in real life, or you have friends online that are creators too, or
I don't have anybody that I know that I can think of that does comic books. I had some friends that I went to school with, you know, and did art as well. Unfortunately, that's really not the case anymore. I have
okay.
met a lot of people online that do comic books, and it's been really great. That's been very cool. You know, being with Alterna, unfortunately, it ended poorly.
Hmm.
But I got to meet, you know, Clint Stoker that does Downcast, Brian Baugh that does Wolf and Batsy, Spence. So I've met a lot of these people that I wouldn't have met otherwise. So that's been a lot of fun, you know. And we can talk art, we can talk writing, we can talk about comics in general. So I do have a lot of people that I talk to online, like John's Longbox, Yang Jang Zhao, a bunch of people. So, like I said, Alterna ended very, very poorly, but I got to meet a lot of people in the process. So
So there was some pluses to the minus.
for sure, yeah. I mean, it was brutal, but I don't regret it. I'm
Mhm.
not really big on regrets in general.
Yeah.
It happened, and I'm happy where I'm at right now. I'm glad I left. I'm glad I went to Alterna. I'm also glad I left. You know what I mean? It's like all of those things are, you know, got me to where I'm at right now with yeah, I've met a lot of really great people in comics. Twitter's been very cool
Mhm.
in meeting people. And I know there's some downsides. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot of drama. There's a lot of
Yeah.
YouTube screaming. I'm not
Hmm.
really involved in any of that, so that's cool with me.
Mm.
Although, you know, the Alterna split, I was the subject of live streams, you know, like
Yeah.
that is awkward. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but
Having people talk about you
yeah, but
when you're
I,
not
I
there.
I didn't care enough to respond. You know, that's kind of
Uh,
I'm like so.
it's on them for doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you draw on stream. Have you ever thought of doing like any of the draw streams where you get together with some of your buddies that you've come across and draw subject matters?
Yeah, I have done a few of those. Ben Soto, that he did Tricks and Treats, him and Justin. I think, and also there's some other people. I apologize, I don't remember their names because it's an anthology book.
Yeah.
He has a channel called Sketch Chat, I think, and we've done some group draw streams, which have been a lot of fun. Just, you know, whatever we're working on at any given time. Um, you know,
Yeah.
so I don't do them per se on my channel. Honestly, it's kind of selfish because sometimes I'll take my videos and then speed them up and use them as like promos. So
Hmm.
it if I had other people on there, it's a lot harder, to
Hmm.
edit that out. But yeah, I've been on some channels doing stuff like that. So that's been fun.
Yeah. And I mean, it could be, well, I don't know what your work week is like, so
Yeah, it's weeks or during the week is almost impossible for me. So
yeah. So, do you work in office with your coding job or programming job?
yeah,
Or
working in office past 5 years or so. There's nothing else to talk about that. It's an
yeah,
office,
yeah,
there's a commute involved, so
yeah,
it's even less cool. But
yeah. Unlike when you work on your comics where the commute is just the walk
yeah,
to your desk for your
yeah, that's the dream,
yeah,
unfortunately. But
yeah.
comics is still in a place where it's extraordinarily difficult to make any sort of living doing comics outside of those few people.
So do you work on your comic in the evening or is it mostly weekends when you're not in the office? Or...
In the evenings, I go to work very early so I can get home early, and then I basically just start drawing when I get home, and draw all night as much as I can. And
Okay,
then on the weekends, you get some long days in there to really crank out some artwork.
okay. So you have the energy to work late like that.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I love it. So, you know, I know some people are like, "How do you do that?" I'm like, if not, I'd be sitting on the couch watching TV or something. I don't,
Mm,
you know, I would fall asleep or, maybe read a book, but even
yeah.
reading, that's that's gonna, I don't know. Yeah, for me, drawing, it's what kind of keeps me motivated.
And on your commute, do you drive or do you
I
take public?
drive.
Yeah.
I used to take public transportation a long time ago when I worked at that advertising agency. I could do it.
Mm,
I got so much reading done. It was fantastic. But
yeah.
so, I mean, the commute, it does allow me to write sometimes. There
Hmm.
are times where I'm trying to think of a plot device or,
Hmm.
patching up some plot holes that I figured that on the commute. So
Yeah. I find driving does help jog the noggin
yeah,
on like I don't know what it is about like kinetic when you're moving or in a place where you can't actually physically write, the ideas just kind of flow.
yeah. Yeah, I did this video a while back about like living with your characters, and it's something that I try to do. Like I'm always thinking about whatever scene or comic I'm working on, so
Hmm.
that way it doesn't take long. I'm like, okay, where was I? I was in this location, and I need to figure out how they're getting out, or whatever the
Hmm.
case may be. So that's where the commute, you know, I got to look for some pluses to a commute, and that's it, I guess.
Hmm. So you have other stories in mind that you want to do. Do you have the characters already fleshed out, or are they still in their uh, infantile stage where they're just a idea?
Um, I I kind of work on them on and off. I don't want to devote too much energy towards them now because I need to focus on Horace issue 4 and 5. I know a lot of people they get sidetracked and then they
Yeah,
never finish stuff, and I know how that works.
guilty.
So I make sure that every once in a while I revisit the characters and I'll just do a drawing or something just to kind
Hmm.
of keep it like in the background, but I definitely don't devote any time to it. As far as the issues I'm working on, even issue 5, I don't want to think too much about issue 5 until I get there. I just know I have an outline, I have the characters, I know what's going to happen, but I don't want to start drawing these elaborate drawings for issue 5 when I'm still in issue 4. So I
Yeah.
try to focus on what I'm working on just to get through every page all the time. So
So like if an idea comes up for something else, you'll write it down, but move on
Yeah.
into focus,
Yep.
not dwell in it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, it would be cool if there was a pocket universe that did this, and I'll maybe do a sketch, a note, and then but that's it. I don't dwell on it. Start looking at architecture books and start, because that'll just it's a rabbit hole. Like you said, everybody does it. All artists do it. And you got to be
Hmm.
aware of you doing it.
Yeah. So would you consider Horace H. Hoover your your I'm forgetting the term, like the crux of your work, or do you think you have work down the pipeline that will be like your
Like a magnum opus kind of thing.
yes, that's the word I was looking for, magnus opus.
Uh what I want to do with Horace H. Hoover and the like I haven't even started to like talk about what I think makes it original. I think could be, am I ever going to get there? I just don't know. Um, I don't know. I have a couple of stories that I think are really, really good, and it depends on what sort of jives with the audience. And Horace H.
Hmm.
Hoover, it's a hard sell, and for people, you know what I mean? You have to be open to reading a book about a guy with a vacuum cleaner on his head.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a certain kind of person that is open to that. When I go to conventions, you can see a lot of people. If it's not Marvel or DC, they don't even see it. It's not that
Hmm.
they stopped, they evaluated, and they decide they don't like it. They don't even see it.
Yeah,
So I think that is an impediment, but the people that do read it do like it, and it's a very cool thing. So the other stories I have in mind are definitely more mainstream in that, like, visually it would be like a dark fantasy draw, something that they saw. So if somebody likes any fantasy at all, they could potentially read this, or any horror, they could potentially read this. Whereas Horace H.
yeah,
Hoover is so niche that, so I gotta kind of go with what people really glom onto, and we'll see.
yeah. I know for myself, I had seen the character design like several times. I don't even I know it was like on the internet and it was intriguing, but like I think it was like Monday or it was probably Sunday because it was like you were streaming that morning. I saw
Mm,
your tweet about it being on Amazon. And so I dug a little bit more into you and more into the book and I'm like, okay, this looks like something I want to read. I read the
yeah,
first samples and
that's
it was
cool.
good.
Thank you. Yeah, it's again one of my favorite reviews is this one guy, Dad's Den of Pop Culture. He has a YouTube channel, and he had gotten a bundle of Alterna books. This was issue 2, and he even said, he's like, man, I got this book, this Horace H. Hoover book, and I don't know, is it going to be cutesy? Is it this? I'm like, I wasn't. He's like, I wasn't too keen on it. But once he opened it up and read it, he said he loved it, and it was, highest recommendation and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, that's kind of how I see it.
Mhm.
It's a hard sell for some people, but if they read it, they're gonna like it. But getting them to like be open to that initial vacuum cleaner guy is tough.
Then have you thought about doing a digital run on like there's Webtoons, Tapas, and Global Comics and allowing people to read it like a sample of it for free? That way they can kind of get a taste for the character and the story.
Yeah. So before I submitted to publishers, I actually posted it on Webtoons,
Hmm.
and so I did the first issue on Webtoons, and I got a lot of good feedback. Again, that was just more like sort of confirmation that I'm like, okay, people do like this, but are they willing to read it? So I might put it back on Webtoons again. The reason I took it off there is because it was so buried that
Hmm.
like, even if you searched for it, you couldn't find it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that was my issue with Webtoons. So maybe Global Comics or another avenue is a little better. for something
M-
like that because there's so
Maybe
much
if
manga on webtoons.
maybe even on your own website, having free samples of the pages.
I used to do that actually. I had a free PDF
Oh, okay.
of some stuff. So I yeah, that is the goal. Maybe webtoons, some other, you know, it's like okay, I put it on my website first, then I put it on Amazon. So I'm hoping every month or two I can get it to more people. So
Hmm.
that is the goal.
And I think also help with some friends too, promoting it, people that have read it,
Yeah.
doing reviews and just talk about the book will help get into people's sight at least.
Yeah. And yeah, so when people review it, that always helps. Like
Hmm.
that's a huge deal. People that know the book are less reticent to do a review of every issue though. I think it's like, oh, I did a review of two. So, I might send the book out to some people just to review it that
Hmm.
that that I don't know personally. That's always a good way to get some more word of mouth on YouTube. And
Now you mentioned what you think is special about it. You haven't mentioned.
well, yeah, I mean his backstory, his powers, and
Hmm.
everything essentially. I
Well,
haven't.
you're hinting at it.
Yeah, yeah. Like I don't. It's a big reveal in the book,
Hmm.
and I do mention there's a few hints in here that
Hmm.
hint of what it's going to be, but I don't. And I might have mentioned a little bit more here and there, but we'll see.
Like when he was talking to the guy that wanted him to get the idol in exchange for the map,
Yeah,
he kind of mentions that it coincides with his, oh, what was it? His journey.
yeah. He's
So,
on his quest. Yep, I
yeah.
kind of mentioned that. There's a place where that big demon appears,
Hmm. And he smacks
and
it. And,
yeah, and he says, what does he say?
oh, even Bookbug, because he said that he damaged his armor, the grimoire.
Yep. And the demon says another fool not interfering wherever you travel. That's a big clue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's all in there, so
Hmm.
whenever the reveal does happen, hopefully it'll be substantial, but
Yeah.
it's going to take many issues to get there. I
Hmm.
think, after the fifth issue, um it would be probably five issues, before we really get there. So we'll
Oh,
see.
okay. So so you're gonna have like different storylines that are each gonna be like a little mini series that coincide together, or
Um, I should get going here in a little bit here, but
oh, sorry.
that's okay. So the five issue mini series is going to be sort of a self contained thing in a way, but after that, it's going to be sequential. But
Okay.
it is going to be sequential. So issue one, two, three, four, five. The difference is it's not going to be a 24-page floppy. It could be a 36, 40. Like the variation is going to be in the length of the issue.
Hmm.
So that's really, but it's going to be sequential and it's going to be sort of a standard numbering system. I don't want to do a bunch of miniseries because I think that's very difficult. Like I get confused by like when characters have eight different miniseries. I'm like, okay, what
Yeah.
comes before what, and does that affect?
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
see that because
So
that's one of the issues. The only reason why I read some of the Ape Sapien stuff was because I found it free online, but there's like several different miniseries, and I'm like, which I don't know which one starts first, but I'm just gonna
yeah,
read and find out.
I hate
Uh,
that.
yeah,
I'm always confused by
yeah.
what to buy. So that's why one miniseries and then the rest is just sequential.
Hmm.
And what I might do is just this is volume one, and I'll just do volume two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10, and just collect the next issue or two. And then that way there will be a way to start from 0 to 100.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Well, I think that covers everything.
cool.
Um, I do want to say that I like the carnivorous beast design in the when it gets thrown down into the pit area in Laquat.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
a fun character.
Oh, this guy's fun too. The hairy man.
Yeah. Yeah, he was interesting. I mean, spoiler, like the idea that he's silent, but at the very end, it's Horace's vocabulary basically and
Mm,
his loquaciousness, which keep him from. Oh, that guy, yeah.
yeah.
I'll be honest, that took me a long time to nail that on the character.
Hmm.
When you sit down and do a monster design, it is coming up with a unique monster.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. So this was like a combination of character designs I had done to get something that I thought was original. At first, it's like, oh, it looks like the alien monster. It looks like
Hmm.
this monster. So I was very happy with that particular design.
And I do have a theory of like where giant the hairy man came from.
Do you? What's your
Yeah.
theory?
Well, I'm thinking it's connected to the device that Book Bug had created when he was a child and was thrown down into the pit area.
Interesting. That's an interesting theory.
Yeah. We'll
Yeah.
see if it's
So
correct.
yeah, all of those things, nothing is an accident.
Yeah.
Because as a reader, I love learning that things were like planted way back and you can
Hmm.
follow it. So as a reader, I try to give as much of that as I can.
Hmm.
Yeah, nothing is an accident. Everything is kind of planned out. I do also hate whenever writers are like, oh, that was supposed to be like that from the beginning. And it's just
Yeah.
bull, it's
Yeah.
BS. It's like George Lucas saying, "Oh, Luke and Leia were totally brother and sister." I'm like, no, they weren't. You absolutely retconned that. That's complete baloney.
Hmm.
Um, so I
That's
hate when
why I
what's
just say
that?
Star Wars is a soap opera in space.
Yeah. So I hate when writers do that. So I'm
Yeah.
trying to make like as I'm trying to lay out as much of that as I can with and
Hmm.
because I don't want to get called out on it later.
Yeah. But it's a good book so far, and I like where it's going.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for grabbing it from Amazon too, because I wanted to see how the whole process worked and
Yeah. Part of it was financially sound on doing that because I was originally going to do like the first issue on your site,
yeah.
which was like $8, but with
Yep.
shipping, it was $16. And like, it's cheaper to get it on Amazon with
Yeah.
3 issues.
It is, and that's I wanted an option for that. Like I said,
Yeah.
sometimes shipping will kill you on
Yeah.
some of this stuff. So I wanted an option that was cheaper and easier for some people to get. So
And I did want to just mention something. There is a few spots that I noticed that the colors are a little bit away from the border of the panel.
okay.
Yeah. It's not very noticeable, but
Oh, and is this an issue one?
yeah.
Yeah, that's actually on purpose.
Oh,
Yeah, I I was playing around with like,
what's that?
whenever you have traditional printing,
Yeah.
like it gets offset.
Okay. It's like very minute, but on the purple panel, like
Yep.
that.
Yeah, and in the first issue, I said, you know what? Maybe I'll kind of try to mimic how like the old printing was because sometimes again it would get offset and
Yeah.
you would see that. So
Hmm.
I just kind of played around with that. There's a couple of panels where that happens, but that was intentional. I don't think I did it for issue two. I think issue two I said, yeah, I'm just gonna.
Hmm.
Uh, I think there might be a place or two in issue two though, but yeah, again, it was a way to kind of mimic
Yeah.
the old printing. So
Yeah, there's a little bit in issue two. Like right there.
yep, yeah. So I just think there's less of it.
I mean, it's not major if it was uh,
Yeah, it was
on accident,
intentional. Yeah,
but
yeah. I was just going for that old old printing look without actually, having traditional printing. So,
Which, since it was on Altura, it has had the newsprint. That
yep.
probably made it look really cool with the flat colors. And
Yeah.
I mean, it still looks great
Thanks.
in the printing job. Oh, I should have mentioned distribution. So when people buy it from your website, does it just you pack it up and send it, or
Yeah, I just pack it up and send it. So I have a couple of boxes left of issue one, two, and three.
Mhm.
And I just send out a Gemini mailer. I throw some extra goodies in there, like stickers and whatnot, that I've accumulated over the years, and ship it out pretty quickly in a day or two.
And then
So,
is that something with crowdfunding because it's a bigger scale on the distribution? Do you th do you already have a setup for that, or?
yeah, I actually have a studio outside my place that
Oh,
I
okay,
that I can do some quite a bit of mailing and packing without, taking over my living room or bedroom or something like that. So,
okay.
so I'll be set for crowdfunding stuff whenever that happens, which as of right now looks like the beginning of next year. Honestly, it's not going to be
Oh,
before the end of the year. So,
that's very cool. Well, it was nice talking to you.
yeah, thanks
Thank
for having me on. I appreciate it. This was fun.
you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And so usually when I do the thumbnail, I do a photo of the person that's I'm interviewing and then
Okay,
an image of like the book that they're working on or
great.
illustration. So I'll send it your way once I'm done with that. And,
Cool. Thank you. I
all
appreciate it.
right. And thank you for coming on my channel. I appreciate that. You're always welcome back if you want to live stream or just talk shop. And
Yeah, definitely. I'll
yep.
let you know.
All right. Thank you. Have a
Thanks.
good day.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.